question is, are you ready?
What do you guys want to talk about?
Let me talk to you. Yeah.
Throwdown Nation, we are live. It is a Thursday night. We are rolling on Instagram, on YouTube, on Twitter/X, on Facebook, and on Twitch. It is episode 118 of the Throwdown with Matt, and today we are throwing down with a Louisiana-based wrestling announcer and commentator, the one and only Mr. Sammy Kiss. How you doing, Sammy?
I'm doing great, man. How are you doing? Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, man. I've been looking forward to this one. And for those of you that are watching this live, if you have any questions or comments, just throw them in the chat, and we'll either handle them as we go or do a little Q&A at the end. So we'll go ahead and get started with the first and the most obvious question, and that is, how long have you been involved in the wrestling business?
I guess directly involved, I've been involved for about 8 years or so. I've been interested in wrestling my whole life, but I first joined Wildcat Sports about 8 years ago. So, and it's been, steady growth since then.
Got you. So, aside from being a commentator and announcer, have you ever actually wrestled, or have you had any desire to actually wrestle?
Well, first, I think anyone that gets involved in wrestling has a desire to wrestle. I think at some point most kids grow up wanting to be, holding the championship belt above their heads at WrestleMania, that sort of thing. That was me too. I had a big dreams of being a wrestler, but I was never a kid. I always kind of felt passionate about wrestling, that I thought that when I was older that I would want to pursue it, but kind of figured that it would be particularly challenging for me to be a wrestler since I was not particularly athletic. So from an early age, I kind of thought that I wanted to be involved, but not necessarily banking on that I would be a wrestler myself. Now, I did go through some early training when I first signed up with Wildcat Sports. I was looking to try and throw my hat in the ring. But thankfully, even though that didn't work out, I showed a lot of virtues in other places, which allowed me to get opportunities to do interviews and do commentary. And now I'm actually one of the owners of Wildcat Sports. So I've moved from the bottom of the ladder all the way to the top. And now awesome. I do commentary for all kinds of promotions too. So it's been pretty cool. So no, I don't do a lot of actual in-ring wrestling. I haven't done any of that, but I pretty much do everything else around it that you can think of.
Got you. But yeah, I know what you mean. As a kid, you always have those dreams. But it was funny, I'm an older guy. I'm 55. So yeah. When I was of the age where I could have considered pursuing it, it was still very much the land of the giants. Oh, yeah. and I'm not a particularly big guy. I'm about 5'5". So, I mean, size alone, especially at that time, there was
Yeah,
just no way.
and there's an element of that too, because I'm 5'8", so that's part of it too. Is that it's not just you couldn't be a wrestler, or it'd be challenging to be a wrestler because you're not big, but also if you were to wrestle and you're a smaller size, that you have a lot more pressure to be able to do the super athletic, those ridiculous high spots, to be able to be a very flashy performer, which is very challenging for a lot of people to kind of accept that if your shortcomings are in this area, you have to really elevate your game in these other areas. You have to be a 10 in so many departments if you can't put any marks on the page elsewhere. So it was one of those, being practical about it, but obviously there's competition for positions all around the board, but there's a lot that goes into the world of professional wrestling outside of the actual wrestlers themselves. So, and I was always very kind of keen to be part of those kinds of things.
Well, I've got to say, I've had a couple of Wildcat folks come on the show, and I've been extremely impressed. You guys have a lot to be proud of. I've had Lucky on, and she was just she was a treat. I've really her.
Oh yeah, she's she's a sweetheart. She's one of our up and coming trainees here. She's got a really big upside. Her and Kalia Love are two girls that everyone in like Wildcat management has a lot of high hopes for, that they could maybe break through and be big things one day. But yeah, so when Wildcat was formed back in 2011, it was started by Orlando Jordan and Luke Hawks. And Luke Hawks is born and raised here in New Orleans, and Louisiana used to be such a hotbed for professional wrestling back in the 70s during the territory days. Mid-South Wrestling, Ernie Ladd, Junkyard Dog, legendary names. They pack out the Superdome, all kinds of things. And then, in the 80s, when the NWA started shifting more to being WCW, and then obviously the WWF, they would still tour here, but it kind of, burned down a lot of the territories. But then in the early 2000s, back with with YouTube and the internet, and that kind of void that happened whenever WWE bought ECW and WCW, you saw promotions trying to kind of rise up. You had like Ring of Honor and TNA most notably, but there were a lot more visible promotions kind of popping up around the country. But that still left kind of a blank spot in the Southeast and the South. And so the mission statement for Wildcat that Luke Hawks wanted to do was to bring professional wrestling, like good, strong, credible professional wrestling, back to New Orleans, back to Louisiana. And I think over the last 13, 14 years, we've done a really great job of building that back up, trying to put Wildcat on the map. That if you go to Louisiana, that's like the Wildcat territory. And we're trying to always expand and go beyond that, where we're not just New Orleans based, we're not Louisiana based, we're just one of the best independent promotions in the whole country.
Absolutely. So, you mentioned being a lifelong fan. What is your earliest wrestling related memory?
Oh man, I know I had a Hulk Hogan toy. It was one of the first figures I remember having. I had a Bart Simpson and I had a Hulk Hogan. And I always was fascinated with stand-up comedy when I was a little kid. My had aspirations for being a stand-up comic, so we were always watching different bits and things like that. And in a very, very young age, like before I don't even know how old I would have even been, like maybe 5 or younger, I was really interested in Andy Kaufman. So, and then Andy Kaufman was so wrapped up in the wrestling world. He's now in the WWE Hall of Fame, but his rivalry in Tennessee with Jerry Lawler was something that really kind of resonated with me, which I didn't get at the time. I didn't really get Andy Kaufman, but it was interesting. And then it was just so weird. Then when I started getting more involved in wrestling, that kind of was what I call it. So that's really my first exposure to wrestling, was not through wrestling, but through learning as much as I could about Andy Kaufman, because his whole story fascinated me so much.
Oh yeah.
But then as a real fan, I didn't really start becoming a fan where I would say that I watched regularly enough until probably the late 90s, early 2000s, during the Attitude Era. And the first thing I remember that like really left an imprint on me was the rivalry with Triple H and Mick Foley. Because it's weird not thinking about it now. Like at first I would credit Mick Foley, but it really was a credit to Triple H because there were all these moments in their rivalry where it would be Triple H versus Dude Love, or it would be Triple H versus Mankind, and Mankind would basically be getting his ass kicked, so he would have to take it up a notch, so he would transform into Cactus Jack. And every time that would happen, it happened like 2 or 3 times. And there was this one particular SmackDown where they were gonna have like a no DQ match, and Mick Foley said that like because of that I can use this, and he pulled out the barbed wire bat. Every time he did anything like that, they would always shoot Triple H, and he always had this look on his face of like, oh, like please, Jesus, please, no, nothing, and was so like, and it's weird because he doesn't do that very often.
Right.
And like I didn't realize it at the time, but enough even in that during that era that he was Mr. Tough Guy, Mr. Serious, and he would no sell a lot of things. But whenever he was when that happened, like he was like, oh crap, like I don't want, I'm done, I'm out, I'm good, I'll leave. Like we don't do anything.
Yeah.
And it really sold the that it made Mick Foley like a killer. So that's the first thing I really kind of remember was that elemental story part of it, that like this guy can beat this guy up, but then once he kind of kicks into another gear and he basically transforms to a different character, then the other guy doesn't want anything to have with him.
Gotcha. Yeah, one thing I will say about Triple H, he was one of the first guys that really sort of caught on to the art of emoting with facial expressions alone.
Yeah.
He was very good
Yeah.
at selling just based on expression without saying a word.
Yeah. I always think about that Randy Orton is probably my favorite of like the modern era of guys that does such a great job of facial expressions and
Yep.
looking so many different ways. And a lot of those video packages that you'll watch him, I'm always amazed how many clips they have him where he's not making the same face in like any clip that they show of him.
Yeah.
Which is very rare once you start thinking about it. It's like, and a lot of guys are not bad at it, like, but they have like 7 or 8 different kind of go through things that they do. Like, this is what I kind of look like when I'm angry. This is what I kind of look like when I'm mad, which is better than having no range at all.
Right.
But Randy Orton, I think, is the best modern example of someone who realizes how much your story that you're telling in your face, and how to have as much subtlety, but also as much different sides that you can show with your facial expressions. Yeah, Triple H was also very good at that too.
Absolutely. So away from wrestling, what are some of your other hobbies and interests?
Man, it's weird. Like, so, I was proposed to recently by someone to get into a project, and talk about, like, what would you want to talk about if we did something like this? And my first thought is, well, I mean, I would like to talk about wrestling. Obviously, like, I have interests beyond wrestling, but truthfully, is that my life revolves around wrestling. Like, I'm glad that we were able to get time to do this interview because I'm always so busy. I was working on a project for a promotion earlier today. I have so I'll do online consultations and do commentary virtually for promotions as well. So I'm always recording in the studio, doing commentary for promotions around the country. After we do this interview, I'm going to Wildcat training tonight. I'm going to Booker T's reality for one of their shows, which I'm at every other weekend. So I'm always doing something with wrestling, so it's kind of always on my mind because it's just the nature of what it is. So it's hard to say because it's like, even though I know that there's an answer, my instinct is to just want to talk about wrestling. But I mean, like, I love, I was an art kid, so I've always been fascinated with illustrations, reading illustrations, but also like comic books and animation and things like that. I had lofty aspirations as a young man to be a Disney animator once upon a time. So I've always been kind of fascinated with that sense of artistry, which lends to why I do like a lot of graphic design work and things like that. So, you know, like Marvel movies and all those things that are then pulled from that kind of stuff as well. Um, Big Batman fan. I talked to one of our the one half of the Wildcat Tag Team Champ is Jay Spade, and I talk about Batman almost every single time we hang out with each other. So, yeah, I'd say probably Batman's my biggest other hobby. You know, I have 2 kids too that I like to spend a lot of time with, so that whatever they're into, I get into
Right.
too. So they're into
Yeah.
Minecraft and they're into a lot of ridiculous YouTube trendy
Oh
kinds of
yeah.
things.
Yeah.
So
How old are they?
it's hard to keep up. Yeah.
How old are they?
So my oldest is about to turn 7 in a few weeks, and then I have a 4-year-old son as well.
Nice, nice. I've got a son who will be 16 in August,
Oh wow.
and
Okay.
he definitely keeps us busy. He's
Yeah.
finishing up his sophomore year in high school. He's a
Yeah.
lacrosse player, so you know
Okay.
the,
Okay.
the lacrosse season gets a little crazy, but you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Um, so tell us, you know, they say that the best personas are kind of yourself turned up to 11. So
Yeah.
tell us a bit about on air Sammy and kind of compare and contrast him with everyday you.
You know, I think of the character of Sammy Kiss not as a character. Truth is that whenever I'm on camera, I am doing a performance. You know, it is a
Right.
performative art. So that sense of your own personality turns up to an 11, even for a commentator or an announcer or a manager, like Paul Haynes, ideally being himself, but he's not being himself. He's being a character, but it is a lot of really level. I'm
Right.
not a character to that degree in terms of any of the television shows that I work. You know, whenever I'm doing commentary for Wildcat, you know, I run play by play. I'm kind of the lead announcing with me, with David Powers and hard buddy Chris Harper, and they're kind of the more colorful. They're the characters, and I'm kind of the straight man of the team. But then whenever I work in reality wrestling, they have a play-by-play guy in Kirby Carrion that I work with, so it allows me to kind of show more of my personality and be more of a character of adding more humor or more interesting kind of dynamics beyond just talking about what's going on in the ring. So it depends on what the show calls for. It depends on what you're really doing on the show. But I always feel like I'm being myself, even though I don't think that's necessarily true. But to me, I'm just being me. And like the saying says, turning yourself up to the wall. Because that's what's so great about wrestling is that while it allows you sometimes to be a character in a sense that like the Undertaker is a character,
Yeah.
Goldust is a character, Kane is a character. These are like no one would argue about that that's not that is kind of a heightened sense of reality. They're still being performed by real people who have to have something true come out of them that is being shown. So that's why they don't come off like characters. Like the Undertaker feels like a real person because it is a real person doing those things and evoking those kinds of things. And the man Mark Calloway, the person behind the Undertaker is a real person. He lets that out. Same with the Stone Cold Steve Austin or The Rock or John Cena or whoever it is. And I think not that people aren't genuine, but the more you can evoke your truth, the more people can see how genuine you're being, and the more that they can invest in
Right.
whatever you're doing. And that I think includes even on commentary. If people are doing, and there's always been a talk about commentary in recent years where it feels like people think that it's garbage, and I think part of that's because if they're overly produced, you've got 3 guys that are being
Yeah.
someone's in their headset telling them what to say. That's not them
Exactly.
talking. That's somebody else talking. So you don't buy it because you don't
Yeah.
feel that it's real. You know, Michael Cole, I think, got a really bad rap for a long time, which wasn't his fault because he
Yeah.
was just doing what he was being paid to do. His boss was telling him to do a certain thing. Whereas when he first kind of got his big break, when they did the brand split and it was him and Taz, no one ever talks bad about that era. Like, everyone loved that duo of Taz and Michael Cole, and people love Taz because Taz comes off as always being himself.
Very genuine.
And I think when Cole is allowed to be himself, even if he is still a little corny or a little, maybe not the coolest guy in the room, compared to like a Pat McAfee or a Corey Graves, something like that, you can at least accept what he's saying. And I'm very pleased at the turnaround, myself included, at kind of the narrative around Michael Cole, because for so long people hated on him because he was replacing Jim Ross, and he got a lot of unnecessary heat for not being able to live up to the legendary duo of JR and the King. And I think that finally died down, that people kind of accept that's where he's at. But now that he's able to kind of just be himself, I think more than he was, allows people to accept him more. And because they accept him more, they're able to listen to the commentary more. And if you're listening to the commentary more, you're allowing that to help inform the story of what you're doing, which makes the whole thing better. You know, if you're tuning out any parts of a match, you're not invested in it. You know, whether that's the referee, whether that's the announcer, whether that's the wrestlers, whether that's the audience, whether that's the cameras, whatever out of it, that's one aspect in more. And wrestling is at its best when it only really works if the audience is full in, both feet in, invested in what's going on.
Absolutely. And the commentary teams in WWE seem to be having such a better time now that they don't have Vince yelling at them through the earpiece on a constant basis. I get the impression that Hunter basically sits back and kind of lets them do their thing without, constantly micromanaging every word,
And it's weird, like, especially for like Pat McAfee, for example, seems, I don't know, but that he feels like he gets a lot of lateral to kind of go off as he wishes, in the sense of he's just being Pat. Like, Pat, go out there and you be you. Cole, I'm sure, gets more like guidance, because he has to know, where's this story going? What are we trying to emphasize? And who are the sponsors? Who are this? There's a lot more to what's going on in the ring. But he's been there since the late 90s. So like, he's been there for 30 years or almost 30 years, So like, he has enough tenure that you'd think he'd be able to trust that you can kind of give him an idea of what you want him to do, and he can just go. Like, I can understand, like, whether it's Vince McMahon, whoever's running the show, wanting to make sure that the people who are whatever doing part of the show are doing what you want them to do, because it's your show. But there comes a point where you can't micromanage everything, because then it's just robotic. If I tell 10 people to do the same thing and they all listen and they do 10 things, the people on the other side, they're going to go, well, why do you even have 10 people? Just have one, because if they're all going to do the exact same thing, what's the point? You want variety. You want different angles. You want to be able to trust, but like any other critic, like movie critics, things like that, like you want to feel that whoever you're listening to, you can relate to for whatever reason, even if you, at the end of the day, know that they're a different person.
Absolutely. So if you can narrow it down, tell us about your favorite match that you have participated in as a commentator, announcer. Is there one or two that kind of stick out?
Yeah. So, well, there's a couple. So, when I first started with Wildcat, I was, at the very bottom, and you have to work your way up. And now that I'm an owner, and I'm a producer, and I have more hands-on developing, what's going to happen on the show, and like who's going to be parts of what kinds of things. I take a lot of pride in how well shows go. So we had an event. Wildcat has a big event every November called the Revolution Rumble. It's our anniversary event, and our most recent one um, from just a few months ago, at the end of close out 2024, we had the Dudley Boys, and we had uh, Mandy Sachs, and we had Mark Henry, and we had a lot of big names there too. But I was very proud of all of our athletes and all put with the show that we put on because of how much I worked on what was going to happen. Um, I'm very proud of the work I did. That I had to help tell that story on that show. There was also a match with Luke and PJ Hawks on that show that was very emotional. That stands out. But the match that I always say is when I first started in the business, I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know it was going to work out. I always dreamed as a kid of being a commentator, but you never know that's gonna happen.
Right.
I don't have a broadcasting background. I don't have an athlete background. It's just from a merit of passion and work and trying to do my best to earn the spots that I'm given. So the first show I did commentary live, where I was there doing live during the show, happened in 2019, and our big show that year for the Revolution Rumble, there was a match between Stevie Richards and PJ Hawks, and it was like a hardcore match where they wrestled all around the building. And I don't know, I was just very passionate, and it was one of those matches that while it was happening, I can remember now, like thinking like, I can't believe that like this is actually my life now. Like I can't believe I get the opportunity to do this. And it stands
Right.
out to me, I think, because like it kind of all hit me like while it was happening. Like I can remember, like I can watch the match back and look and hear in my voice like, no, like I'm realizing and appreciating the moment, like in the moment, which doesn't happen a lot.
Right.
This is very keeps going, keeps moving. There's not really a lot of time to kind of sit back and enjoy and appreciate like that you're here and that what you're doing is what I always try to say, like, remember that where you are now, you dreamed of one day being at years ago. You're always trying to get bigger. You're always trying to do more. You're always trying to accomplish more. But it's important to remember that what you have, to be grateful
Yep.
for it. And that particular match, for whatever reason, it just kind of like a wave, like hit me like really hard in that moment. So it always stands out to me. So whether that's my favorite match I've ever called, I don't know. But it's what comes to mind is from that 2019 Revolution Rumble between Stevie Richards and PJ Hawks.
Gotcha.
So.
Well, like I said, I've been a fan of this stuff since I was around 11, and I'm 55 now. So, over the years, I've heard a lot of great voices. Early on, it was Gordon Soley and Lance Russell out in the Memphis territory. And then you've had obviously JR and the King, you've Tony Schiavone, so with all of these great voices and all of these great predecessors as an announcer, who would you say is, announcer wise, who is your biggest influence? Who do you draw the most from?
Man. Well, so one thing that happens with me now, I work a lot with the Title Match Network, who streams a lot of different promotions throughout the whole country, and they streams around the world. And I'll do a lot of work with set promotions. Most of the time I go to these promotions, I'm calling it live. Sometimes they'll record their stuff and they don't have a commentator there, or they don't have the best in terms of production for their show, and so that gets supplemented in post. And a lot of times I get assigned to do those shows. So I do a lot of shows where I'm the solo commentator, like I'm just calling it by myself. So a big influence for me has always been Joey Styles, because he did the early days of ECW by himself. And he does a great job of balancing out almost like he's talking to himself in the sense of having kind of a dry wit to kind of talk about things to yourself. So it's like he is still doing the balance of like a conversational thing, even though there's no one there for him to really talk to. And so I always kind of think of that kind of balance because he always did such a great job of being able to inflect different kinds of energy throughout his own announcing, which is very difficult to do, to kind of be talking about this and then move up and then move down and then move all around, because you can't have it be a monotone thing. Wrestling is a roller coaster and there has to be kinds of energy. And to me, if you're in the booth, if your energy doesn't move up and down, the audience doesn't think that it's worthy of them moving up and down. And then they don't get as invested in even if in a subconscious way. So definitely them, definitely him. But by far, I think the ones that I feel like not only are influencing me, but I feel like I'm ripping off a lot, are the greatest, in my opinion, of all time is Jim Ross. In terms of not just his passion, which is what everyone always brings up, like the Stone Cold, how he can make a weapon feel like it's the most dastardly thing, the most emotional thing, and I mean, and to his credit, like that is always, but it's he's definitely an example to meet in terms of passion that you would bring out while calling a show, but then also his ability to react in real time to cover things that don't go the way they're supposed to go. Like he's, people always say like, I don't know how much he got of that. If there's a move that maybe looks like it wasn't supposed to go, and a lot of commentators kind of do the same thing. But he was always doing stuff like that. If something was bad, he didn't sell it like it was great. And if it was like, he does everything dressed up, but he also didn't play like an idiot, but was a great way of not burying what was going on, not killing what's going on, but still not killing his own credibility while calling it. And then, like my favorite announcing, I mean, the obvious answer is also Jerry Lawler and Jim Ross, but
yeah,
my favorite duo is Jim Ross and Paul Heyman. And there was just a synergy of how much, like, it felt like if the argument kept going, they might actually fight with each other at the booth. Was amazing. There was just a kind of energy there that I've never seen in any other team. And whenever, so when I'm working at Reality Wrestling with Kirby, I always feel like when I'll say something to him, and in my head I'll think like, I'm just ripping off Paul Heyman now. Like that's all I'm really doing, and I'm not trying to. It's just he's a bigger influence on me than I even really think, because that was my childhood, my favorite like example of like a contrarian. Like what a piece of, without losing any credibility. Because I mean, I don't know anyone that would say that Paul Heyman doesn't know anything about wrestling. He comes off maybe one of the most knowledgeable people of all time. So to be able to be so credible in what you're saying, but then so full of it at the same time is a very hard thing to do, where you're like, you're right, but you're also very wrong, like at the same time. Like it's very hard to really describe how subtly difficult that can be to ride that balance, where you don't want to be so overtly full of it that no one's even going to listen to you because they know that it doesn't matter. Versus being too, like Jesse Ventura, for example, was great, but I always sometimes feel like he was too right, because then you're like there's nothing that Gorilla can say to him to say that he's wrong. Like it just makes Gorilla look like, not all the time, like and nothing against Chisel, I thought was great, but Paul was able to be right, and yet you still feel he's wrong at the same time, which was amazing.
So, do you have an all-time favorite match as a fan? A match that you can have watched it a million times and you just find yourself going back to it, and there's always some new little something you can pull from it?
Yeah. Well, so as a kid, I wasn't able to attend a lot of wrestling shows when I was younger. We didn't have a lot of money. So the first, time I was able to go to a big show, first WrestleMania I was ever able to go to was in 2009 in Houston. So I got to be there for the Undertaker Shawn Michaels match in person, And as great as that match translates on camera, the energy of that show in person has never been able to be replicated from what I've been to. So to me, that match stands out just because of the visceral energy that it felt in that match. So I watched that one a lot. The match that I always think of as the match that made me a fan is the 2000 Royal Rumble street fight with Cactus Jack,
Mhm.
and Triple H. Back to what I was talking to at the beginning of the show is that, like, I had been watching wrestling for a long time, but that's the match where I was like, I'm hooked. Like, I'm not. This boat's not getting off. It's not docking anytime soon. Like,
Yeah.
we're going full tilt
Yeah.
on this.
Yeah.
So definitely that one.
You know, I've got one that's it's kind of a similar thing. It wasn't a great match, but I'm based in the Atlanta area, and I've been in Atlanta since 1983, and I was actually in the Georgia Dome the night that Goldberg went over on Hogan and got the belt.
Oh
And let me
wow.
tell you,
Okay. Yeah.
just
I
to
imagine
be
the
there,
same
the
kind of
place
thing.
went
Yeah.
unglued. And I mean, just
Yeah,
to
for
feel
sure.
that energy, like I said, not a great match, but an amazing memory. I mean, so
Yeah, for sure.
so in
Matt, I hate to cut you off, but I feel like my signal's gonna cut out at some time soon. So if I lose you, I
okay.
apologize. But I'm getting a
Okay.
warning thing. So
Well, if we do get cut off, thank you for your time. This is
yeah,
really
man. I'm glad we're able to finally do it. Yeah, I know that we had some timing conflicts, but I'm glad that we were able to finally do it. It's been a lot of fun. I can talk wrestling all day, so
oh,
having a
absolutely.
blast.
So, in your opinion, who are the best male and female wrestlers in the world right now? And you're gone. Okay.